My name's Steve Hermitage, and in this video we're going to take a look at stroboscopic flash. The image that I want to create is an image where my hand moves from a fist up to thumbs up, and I want to capture 5 different points of movement in a single exposure. So how am I going to do that then? Well, I'm going to have my flash firing multiple bursts of light, and when the shutter is open, on each burst of light that will capture a different point in the movement. Okay, the first thing then is to check that your speedlight unit has stroboscopic flash. Not all strobe units have, or flash guns have, stroboscopic flash. I'm using a Canon system here, and I'm using the Canon 580EX, and that has stroboscopic flash. Now I'm going to use the flash unit off camera. Normally I would fire my speedlight units using a pretty inexpensive Lasterlight wireless triggering system. But if I do that, unfortunately, that doesn't allow the camera and flash gun to communicate using this more sophisticated flash technique. I need to make sure that the connection from the camera's hot shoe to the hot shoe on the flash unit has all 5 pins connected. And if I make use of one of these off-camera flash cables, I can make sure that that happens, and I can make use of the stroboscopic flash feature. Okay, so I've got my camera, I'm going to position that just here. I've got my flash gun, and I'm going to end up positioning that here. My hand is going to move in this position here, and I've got my black background, and I've got a second piece of black cardboard, and that's going to prevent the light spilling over from the flash unit onto the background. From the lens focusing point of view, what I'm going to do is to use the autofocus on the camera to focus the lens onto the distance here onto my hand, and then I'm going to switch the lens over to manual focus, and that will prevent any refocusing during the course of the exposure. Okay then, we've got the setup, we've got the flash gun, we've got the camera. I'm also going to make use of this cable release, and that's going to enable me to be here, me to move my hand and to take the exposure at the same time. And now what we have to do is work out some of the settings that we put into the camera and we put into the flash gun. So let's just have a look at the flash gun first. Now I want to introduce you to a concept known as the firing frequency. We have to dial in the firing frequency to the flash gun. The firing frequency is the number of flashes per second. Now, if we if we have the shutter speed as a fraction of a second, then the sensor will only see a fraction of that number of flashes per second. Okay, so we need an equation, I think. The number of flashes that we actually have in the camera is equal to the firing frequency multiplied by the shutter speed. Okay, so let's make that a bit more real for our particular situation. So the number of flashes that we want are 5. I want to capture 5 points of movement. If the firing frequency is set, let's say, to 40, then in 1/8 of a second I will have 5 flashes. So 40 flashes per second. In 1/8 of a second there'll only be 5 flashes observed by the camera's sensor. So number of flashes equals the shutter speed multiplied by the firing frequency. If you know the number of flashes that you want and you know the firing frequency, you can work out the shutter speed. Okay, so that's one part of the setup on the speedlight unit. The next part to consider is the power of light that ends up on the subject. Now it's important to remember in stroboscopic flash, if the shutter speed is 1/8 of a second, then we have to be careful not to have any ambient light that will spoil the photo. So stroboscopic flash tends to work very well in low light conditions, where we only have the light from the speedlight. Okay, so what shall we set in terms of power? Now I've got a 1/16 power output on my speedlight, and that enables me to have the correct firing frequency. And you'll find with different speedlight units that you have to have fractions of power to enable to have multiple flashes per second. And it's best to read the manufacturer's instruction guide to give you a feel for what that number is. So I've got 1/16 of a power, and don't forget that the amount of light that ends up reaching the subject is also dependent not only on the power output of the flash, but the distance of the flash from the subject. Okay, so let me just recap then. In fact, there's one thing that we haven't talked about, and that's the aperture setting on the camera. And really, this is a bit of trial and error. Once you've got the correct firing frequency, and once you've got the correct shutter speed that gives you the right number of flashes, you can play with the ISO, the sensitivity of the sensor, and you can also play with the aperture value, the f number. Let me walk you through exactly what I've got then for this particular shot, and you can kind of see the distances that are involved. My camera is just here, my flash gun is pretty much just here, it's that sort of distance. I'm 1/16 of a power on the flash unit, and not that far away from the subject. My firing frequency is 40 Hz. I want 5 flashes into the camera, so that gives me a 1/8 shutter speed. I'm on ISO 100, and when I put all that lot together, a good exposure through trial and error turns out to be f10. So stroboscopic flash is great to pull together all the different components that give you the correct exposure in camera, and you can have some great fun getting shots that end up looking like this one.